How many times do you have to say no to God before he gets angry? Let's find out.
What in the world is the author trying to do? What are they doing with the words that they choose?
Hey, and welcome back to the show where we ask the question, what is the author doing? Usually we ask that question about the Bible, and today we're going to do just that. We're going to look at a passage that gets kind of skipped over a lot in a conversation between two famous characters in the Bible. It's when Moses finds God in the wilderness, and God says, hey, I want you to go free my people from Egypt. It's a conversation that we've seen kind of in dramas, and we've seen it in the wonderful movie Prince of Egypt. But there's a part of it, I think, that we miss because we're not paying attention to what the author is doing with words. Specific words, in fact, one specific word that means to stretch out or to send. And it's funny because it gets translated different ways in the English, which makes it hard for you and me, if we're just reading our English Bibles, to really appreciate what the author's doing. So to help you out, I am going to tell you a little bit about the Hebrew language behind it, so that you can appreciate what the author's doing in the text, and I think get a little bit of the humor that the author is trying to put into the story. There's a moment in the story where Moses, he's shepherding sheep, right? His father-in-law's sheep. He's tried the liberating Israel thing once before. It didn't go well, so he ran for his life. Now he's spent, several decades hanging out in the backwoods of the Levant, taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. And on this particular day, he's shepherding his sheep. He's taking his sheep through the wilderness, and he ends up at the backside of the wilderness, near this mountain, and it's in the original language. It's referred to over and over again as the mountain of the God. Right? There's a sense as we're reading the story that everybody around knew that there was a God that lived on that mountain. No one knew who it was, but they knew that this was a God's mountain. And so Moses passes by, and as he's passing by, he sees this bush on fire. Right? It's a famous story, the burning bush, and he has this conversation with the God who lives on the mountain. We know who the God is, Moses doesn't. Over the course of the conversation, it becomes apparent that this is the family God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so Moses is starting to get a little bit of a picture of who this deity is he's talking to. And at one point in chapter 3, Yahweh tells Moses to go into Egypt and to demand that Pharaoh release the Israelites so that they can come and worship him at this mountain, at God's mountain. But God says, listen, I know that that Pharaoh will refuse to do so, and he's going to raise his hand in strong defiance against my demands. And so, in chapter 3, it says, so I will stretch out my hand, God says. I will stretch out my divine hand against Pharaoh and against Egypt, and I will do my wonders and my signs among them, so that they will know exactly who I am and what right I have to demand that they let my people go. That word, stretch out, is really important. It doesn't seem like an important word, but it is. It's the Hebrew word shalach, which means to stretch out, but it also means to send, in the idea of send out, right? In the context of God's conversation with Moses at that point in chapter 3, he's saying, listen, I know Pharaoh is going to raise his hand in defiance, and so I will send my hand against him, and we're going to see who walks away from this contest the victor. Moses is like, listen, I've done this before. I've failed once before. Who am I that I should go? God says, I will be with you. And Moses says, okay, fine. Well, then who are you, right? I don't know your name. You say you're the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who are you? And God says, you will know me by my name. I will be. It's ironic because it's the same word that he says to Moses' question about who am I? Who am I that I should go? God says, I will be with you. I will be. And then a couple of verses later, Moses says, who are you? And God's answer is the exact same word in Hebrew. I will be what I will be. So Moses has this conversation, right? And at every excuse he comes up with, God has an answer for it. I will be with you. I will give you signs. I will give you my name. In fact, I will equip you with all of the tools you could possibly need to accomplish your task. Moses says, listen, he uses the phrase that it kind of seems weird in English. I have uncircumcised lips, in the sense of like, I can't talk well. One of the things we have to understand is that in the ancient world, especially in this part of the ancient world, circumcision was really common. It wasn't unique to Israel. But in most places, with the exception of Israel, it was used to mark the transition from boyhood to manhood. It was a symbol of fertility and power and virility, right? So for Moses to say, my lips are uncircumcised, it's a way of saying my lips are ineffectual. They are impotent. They cannot accomplish the task that they are meant to accomplish. He's not necessarily saying I have a speech impediment. He's simply saying, listen, I am ineffective with my words. But God puts up with all of those complaints, right? Over and over, Moses raises objection after objection, and over Yahweh says, listen, I will deal with it. I will deal with it. I will deal with it. But there is a moment where Moses says something that absolutely enrages God, and he has to change the whole program. It's a moment where Moses says to Yahweh, most English translations say something along the lines of, send someone else, send somebody else, or send somebody that you would choose, right? In Hebrew, it's that same word, shalach, to send. But it's kind of a weird, redundant way of saying it. Shalach bayad tishlach, or shalachna bayad tishlach. It basically means, please, send by the hand you said you would send. The author is connecting that back to the earlier statement that God made himself, saying, I will stretch out my hand. I will send my hand against Pharaoh. Moses remembers that. And what he's saying in this moment is, listen, God, you said you were going to stretch your hand out against Pharaoh and you were going to be the one to have this contest. You go do it. You said you would do it. You go do it. Leave me out of the program. And that's exactly the moment where God gets annoyed. He says, is not Aaron your brother coming this way? And it seems like a weird change, right? It seems like a weird shift for God to just suddenly switch back to, okay, well, I'll find you a different person to speak, and then you'll be fine. This has nothing to do with Moses claiming that his words are ineffectual. This is everything to do with Moses saying, listen, God, you said you would go fight Pharaoh. I don't want to be part of it. You go do it. But the irony here is that in the story, and this is, I think, what the author's doing by connecting these words together, God says, I will make Aaron, your brother, your prophet, and then I will make you, Moses, like God to both Aaron and to Pharaoh. You see, Moses is trying to get out of the deal. Like, he doesn't want to participate. He wants to be done. He wants to go back to herding sheep in the backside of the wilderness, right? But God wants him to participate. Yahweh wants Moses to be his partner in the project. And Moses' constant refusal to participate comes to a head when Moses says, listen, God, you said you would do it, so you go do it. God's response, Yahweh's response, is to say, fine, I will go do it. But guess what, Moses? I am going to make you God, make you like God to Aaron and to Pharaoh. So sure, I'll go do it, but you're not getting out of this. You are going to have to participate, and you are going to be my representative. You are going to stand in as my avatar before Pharaoh and before the Israelites. And Aaron will go be your prophet, your spokesperson. Instead of you, Moses, being Yahweh's spokesperson, you'll be Yahweh, and Aaron will be your spokesperson. You see, Moses is trying to squirm his way out of the situation, and he's using Yahweh's own words against him. And Yahweh understands exactly what's happening and says, no, that's not what's going to happen. You will be my representative, and by your hand I will stretch out my hand. It's one of those humorous moments in the text that I think we miss if we're not paying close attention to what the author is doing by repeating certain words and calling back to certain parts of the story. If we pay attention, we'll notice what the author's doing, and we can appreciate both the humor and the profound message that the story is trying to say. In this case, it's that Moses wants to get out of his arrangement with Yahweh. He doesn't want to participate, and he thinks he's got Yahweh cornered at the end of their conversation. Yahweh said he would do it. Okay, then you go do it. And God says, no, I am going to make you a participant. And in fact, I will make you my representative. You will be me so that you can go and free the Israelites. Now, the irony is this whole conversation between Moses and Yahweh ends up becoming the backdrop for a different conversation those two people have much later in the same book of Exodus. Later, after Pharaoh has surrendered and the Israelites have left, They've all gathered back at the same mountain in the same wilderness. This happens right after Israel builds a golden calf and breaks, at least two of the commandments that God had just given them as part and parcel of who they were going to be as his people. And his words to Moses are profound. He says, "Get out of the way, let me destroy them, so then I can make you a great nation." And do you know what Moses says? Moses gets back up in God's face and he flings God's own words back at him. He says, "No, you were the one who delivered these people. What will the nations say if they look at you and say, you're a God who brought these people out of slavery just to destroy them in the wilderness? What kind of God is that?" And so God takes a couple steps back and then he says, well, fine, I will send you out. And I will send you, Moses, with the Israelites to the land I promised, but I'm not going to go with you. I'm going to stay here. And Moses says, no. Do you not remember the conversation that we had on this very mountain days and days and days ago, where you said, I had to go because you were doing it and you and me were doing this thing together? Yeah, you're not going to back out of this, God. If you made me do it, then I'm going to make you do it. And the irony in that story, and the way that the author's telling it, is that God listens. God listens to the voice of Moses and says, okay, you know what? I did say that, and I will stay with my people. But we don't get that. We don't appreciate what's happening in the text if we're not looking for what the author is trying to do by connecting conversations and connecting words. God said he would stretch out his hand against Pharaoh. And Moses says, listen, okay, fine, you do it. You stretch out your hand. And God says, yeah, I will, but you will be my voice and you will be my hands. And for the rest of the story of Exodus, for the rest of the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, Moses gets to be the stretched out hand of God. But in the same way, Moses says, God, you can't abandon these people because you made me a participant in this story. I'm going to make sure you stay faithful to your promises. That's what the author's doing with the story. And if we're paying attention, we can see it.